It is with great honor to welcome our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Casey Conway is a seasoned real estate professional with more than 30 years of experience. Casey Conway is a nationally recognized expert and speaker on a wide range of topics ranging from appraisal and bank regulation to ports and securitization. His areas of specialty include housing, industrial, litigation support, industrial and office real estate, North American ports, and land development. Mr. Conway is the Director of Research and Corporate Engagement at the Alabama Center for Real Estate, which is housed within the University of Alabama's Culverhouse College of Commerce. Mr. Conway also serves as the Chief Economist for the CCM Institute. Casey Conway is a widely respected economist with extensive experience in commercial real estate investment. Mr. Conway is a frequent speaker for the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the Federal Home Loan Bank, state bank commissioners, academic groups, professional organizations, and industry associations. He previously served as chief economist for Colliers International, U.S. Let's all give a warm welcome to Mr. Casey Conway. Casey, how's it going?
Appreciate it.
No problem.
I'm going to put this on.
Okay. Do you need that?
One.
Put that right there.
Everybody hear me okay? Good. All right. Get all the wires tucked away, right, Barbara? It's easier for men with our coats, right? We can hide everything. So I really appreciate everybody being here. I want to start with a couple opening comments. So for the veterans recognition, it's so great when to go to an event, in a meeting when we can still do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're proud to do that. For our veterans, I want to give you a statistic. 0.4% of our adult working population is what supports us and gives us our freedom today in the military. It's the smallest percentage of our workforce ever in the history of our country. So heavier loads, so when we think of what they do today and how much, we really do owe a gratitude to the veterans, so thank you on that. On Chris, so I'll tell you the highest compliment for BB&T Grand Bridge. So I've been in Atlanta market 35 years, came from Colorado, and I worked a lot of bank environments. I can honestly tell you my 35-year career, ready, Chris, that I've never encountered a client or a competitor or prospect that we've called on in the banking industry that had ever done a deal with BB&T or Grandbridge that ever said, I'll never do another deal, or it was a horrible experience. So that's the highest testament you can have. You're doing something right there. So thank you for that. All right, so Barbara started off with the red shoe thing. We'll get into that. So you notice a little picture up here. This is Greg Fine. This was us in Chicago at the CCIM Global Conference. So we've started a trend here. We're going to have everybody, Barbara, in these are the CCIM red shoes. Although in Alabama they tell me that they are the crimson red shoes. And I'll tell you how this all came about. Let me put my shoe back on. So I grew up in Colorado. I came to Atlanta and went to school at Emory University. And the reason I picked Emory University is growing up in a large Irish Catholic family, I wanted to pick a part of the country that if I got in trouble, and it made the newspapers, nobody would know. And within 500 miles of Atlanta was the only place in the country I had no relatives. So that's honestly how I picked Emory University. And so for 35 years in my career, I was able to go to every SEC football game. Nobody hated me until about 18 months ago, Barbara. And see, I thought the SEC stood for the Securities and Exchange Commission. And about a year and a half ago, I found out that there's this other SEC. So when the University of Alabama recruited me over to help them with their real estate center, I went over there. I felt, I better find something out about the university. And I found out, supposedly they play football over there, right, Barbara? They do a pretty good job. And so I said, I better put something about the coach in an email to the dean and the executive director. So I figured I put a Saban quote or something in there. I misspelled Coach Saban's name. It even passed spell check. I did it with an E-N. So in spell check, Saban will go through on E-N. I don't know what's wrong there. So I got recalled over to Tuscaloosa and had to go through a week of SEC reform school. And these shoes were my graduation present. So, and my penance or my penalty for this year is I have to wear my crimson red shoes wherever I go and speak. So, but we've made them the CCIM red shoes, and so we think we have a good motto here, Barbara. But put your best red shoe forward, right? That's going to be our CCIM motto. So really. Oops, I did something wrong there. Where's the advancer? All right. So there's my bio. There's where you can find me at Culver House. I also serve, I was recently fortunate enough to be put on the board of directors for a public REIT known as Monmouth. All they do is logistics and industrial real estate, and they're the primary landlord for a little tenant called FedEx. So I am like a kid in a candy store between being with the CCIM Institute, as their chief economist, getting indoctrinated into this thing called college football, and then being in my favorite passion, which is logistics and ports with Monmouth. I'm having an absolute ball. So if you want to know something about really how FedEx and logistics works, every quarter I have new stories I can bring back to you. So let me know. The other thing that's always important, that those of you know if you see me speak before, I learned from my time at the Federal Reserve, Michael Boll and I have talked about this a good bit, is that you have to have a good disclaimer slide. Because when I was at the Fed economists don't like to go out and speak because they're all afraid that they're going to find out that their doctoral thesis is invalid to what they studied. And most of them that are writing policy on housing and mortgages and auto and consumer finance, they've never bought one. So they waited tables and lived at home until they were in their 40s before they got a real job, and that was at the Fed. And so none of them want to go out and talk. So when I got to the Fed, I said, hey man, I'll go out and talk. I was like Mikey on Life Cereal. I'm going to date myself. I'll do anything, right? And so every Monday I had to report. It's a true story. If you talk to anybody at the Atlanta Fed, every Monday morning I had to report to Public Affairs and go, bless me, Chairman. I went out and I spoke again. And I had to tell them what I said and was always in trouble. So I learned a disclaimer slide. So the comments and opinions here, Barbara, they're mine. I've disclaimed the university, CCIM, and I also want people to know, because of current events and the elections, I didn't consult with any Russian authorities. I'm not under investigation by Bob Mueller, and I didn't ask Alexa or Siri for any of my answers to questions. All right, so let's get the big elephants out of the room before we get into the economy. The midterm elections and the Amazon HQ 2-3 split, whatever kind of decision you want to call it. In there, Yogi Berra. If you've got to make a speech and you don't know how to start, just go to get a Yogi Berra quote. He's got something for every occasion. So the first one up there is, this is for Barbara. This is your cue, Barbara. Get ready here for the big saying. So the future ain't what it used to be. Like Alabama having an offense. What the heck? I've learned that already. They used to just have a defense, and now, look at the quarterback. They're sending as many quarterbacks around the country as they do coaches or whatever. So, but anyway, the midterm elections, we're back to, it's like deja vu all over again. Divided government, do nothing. It's going to be absolute paralysis, chaos. It's also deja vu all over again because Georgia and Alabama have the two best football teams in the entire NCAA. And Florida still can't count ballots in elections, right? So all over again. I don't know if we'll ever get a result. The other one is on Amazon HQ2 search. I love this one from Yogi Berra. And this one's for Jeff Bezos and Amazon. You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you are going, because you might not get there. I think they just didn't get where they were supposed to be going. The decision, I think this is the Amazon HQ2 decision, will turn out and be one of the best decisions probably for cities like Atlanta, Raleigh, Charlotte, Orlando, Dallas, basically Texas, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. This is going to be one of the best things, because the first thing is New York, Northern Virginia, and D.C. are completely off every site selection consideration in the country in perpetuity till the end of the world. They're not. Nobody's going to deal with Amazon up there. In fact, yesterday, Citibank already announced they're moving 1,000 employees out of New York because they don't want to deal with the Amazon chaos and situation. So when you look at the decision up there, a couple of things. From a public relations standpoint, they get an A. They got a year of just incredible free publicity, although it almost turned a little bit negative. In terms of integrity of their request for proposal, I give it a failing grade, a D at best, because their RFP, their request for proposal, said it was all about workforce availability, right? We're going to go where we can get workforce. I want you to we're going to talk about this in a minute. LinkedIn does a workforce report each month. And as part of that workforce report that they do, among tracking 146 million of us, they do a skills gap analysis. And they look at the cities that have the biggest skills gap analysis. Who has, what do they need in terms of skilled technical force, and who's producing it. And the city with the worst skills gap analysis, means they don't even have any labor available for anybody to hire, was New York City. Worse than Seattle, worse than San Francisco. Okay, Mr. Bezos, where's that workforce availability thing? How's that going to work out for you? Number 7 was Washington, D.C. right? And so they have Atlanta in their number 10, but they don't understand that Alabama's close by, and we're sending lots of good workforce over, right, Barbara? we'll train all that stuff. But they picked 2 of the 10 worst cities in terms of having skilled workforce. And here's what I fear is going to happen in New York and Northern Virginia. Companies are going to pile out. They will lose more workforce and more companies because the companies are not going to watch their workforce be poached away, and they're not going to get into a wage war where tech wages rise 50% or double in a very short period of time. And you think I'm joking on that? I've already had 3 calls from major companies in the last 48 hours that have said, can you assist? Can either CCIM Institute members, can we refer to chapters in different locations, or the University of Alabama assist in site selection to get us the heck out of here within 6 to 12 months? And let me tell you some of the places they're looking for in the criteria. One of them is a major cybersecurity company. And they asked me, Barbara, about San Antonio because they have this thing called the Port of San Antonio. It has no water, but it's cybersecurity central. They asked about Atlanta because they know we have the workforce here. We have Georgia Tech, we have Emory, we have University of Georgia, we have Georgia State, right? We deliver the workforce here. We also have another thing. We have relative housing affordability compared to the rest of the world. So another one was major defense contractors. They've said, we want to get out. Data center companies. So Northern Virginia is one of the top 3 data centers. They're going to probably lose half of that business. It's going to go to Dallas and Atlanta because they can't deal with the workforce poaching and the impact of Amazon. So for those of you that thought the Amazon HQ2 not coming to Atlanta was a bad thing, what I would tell you is it's a good thing to have politicians keep their mouths shut during things like headquarters searches and not pick on your hometown airline and NRA and whatnot. Just be quiet. Have them let the business people do it. That did hurt us. It put a nail in the coffin. I think Atlanta really had a top chance there until the whole flap with the lieutenant governor and Delta and the NRA over 13 people getting their benefits denied at Delta. But anyway, I give them a D on workforce availability. Transportation, both New York and DC get good marks on that. It's something we need to take a look at here in Atlanta. So if you look at Northern Virginia and Atlanta, when we did our CCIM paper that we published back in February, we picked 5 markets right when the RFP came out. We said, here's the 5. We'll never say another word. We won't revise it. These are our numbers. And we said, it's Atlanta and DC's to lose, right? Atlanta lost it. They shot themselves in the foot, but it may turn out to be one of the best, loss of a foot or amputations you ever had, right? We're going to get a bionic site selection attraction foot instead. The second, we picked Pittsburgh and Columbus, Ohio as our wild card runner-ups. And the reason we did that, who's been to Pittsburgh or Columbus? So Pittsburgh is probably one of the most transformative stories in terms of taking an old steel town industry kind of company, and they are essentially a Silicon Valley today. They stole Google out of Florida. They have the audacity to go down to Florida and say, let's move you up here. They have a little university that does a good job called Carnegie Mellon. Columbus, Ohio, incredible job. They are this epicenter. They're one of its competitors with Atlanta for logistics. Amazon's moving all of their air cargo out of the New York airports in the New York region to Columbus, Ohio. So those were our middle, and then our wild cards were Nashville, Tennessee, and Orlando, Florida. And so Albany, Orlando made the 20 finalists. So we didn't revise it. We published that the end of September after the RFP came out, 2 weeks before anybody else did anything. We never revised it. And in the end of the decision, we ended up with DC and Nashville on the finalist list. Also, back in September, I was suggesting that Amazon ought to revisit. I didn't think they would come out on their 1-year anniversary with an announcement. I said, I think the problem that they're realizing is they're too big for any one city, and that they ought to look at an alternative. And my solution at that time was to look at WeWork, or where's the CBRE guys? See the announcement this week by CBRE? You're going to crush WeWork, I think, in the process. But really teach about a virtual headquarters, right? And you could have, Amazon could have a thing in 3 to 4 cities and could have had floating workspace among collaborative offices and whatnot. I really think that's going to be the virtual headquarters option that we find in the future. But I give them a D, a big disappointment. Housing affordability, what affordability? If you're Jeff Bezos and $20 million is okay, that's considered affordable for a house in DC, Northern Virginia, I guess it's affordable. We ought to be very thankful in Atlanta that we didn't get the Amazon situation, because we really would have had a housing crisis here. So I think we can continue to grow very, very well. So overall, I give them a D. Here's the announcement on Citigroup. They're already starting to move out of Long Island. Already yesterday, 24 hours, 48 hours after the announcement, 1,000 employees out. We're going to see massive bank tech for it. Anybody that needs skilled workforce technology, they're piling out of there. They're not going to wait and compete with Amazon. And Amazon, if there's no workforce there that LinkedIn says, where do you think they're going to get that workforce? They're going to go poach it from all those companies. So be very grateful there. So now with that good news, y'all can rest and take a breath that wasn't a bad thing. I want to talk about the economy, and I use 2 words to describe where we are in the economy today. I use performance enhanced, because everything we're doing in our economy today, it's happening with more skill, more technology at a quicker and quicker pace. So each of these icons up here represent a technology where it took, how many years it took for 80% of the adult workforce to adopt this technology. So Barbara, you and I, it took us 70 years to get comfortable with air travel, TSA, taking our shoes off. Barbara's not that old, but I am. I feel that old sometimes. 70 years to get comfortable with air travel for 80% of us to do it. Credit cards. It took us almost 3 decades to get comfortable with the fact that we could open a credit card account while we're buying stuff, not plan to pay for it, default on it, and go open another one and just keep buying everything we want. It took us 3 decades to figure that out. Amazing. My millennial daughters figured it out in about 2 weeks. I'm trying to reform them on that. ATMs. It took us almost 2 decades to figure, Chris, how to get money out of that box. What's wrong with this, right? We just didn't teach them right. Look at our smartphones. 12 years ago, we didn't have those. How many of you can imagine even functioning today without our smartphones? Right, where we go, our GPS, I just had to replace a car. You know, you plug the thing in now and everything that's on your phone screen is on the car screen, and you don't need a GPS, you don't need to buy the GPS system anymore, it's just a screen. Go to last year, Pokemon Go. Who's heard of Pokemon Go? Anybody with kids or grandkids, right? It took only 19 days last year for 80% of the households to log in to Pokemon Go, right? That's how fast things are moving in our economy. And so here's what's important about it. What we need to think about here in Atlanta, we need to think about in Georgia and the Southeast, it's on education. This was just announced in Huntsville, Alabama. First school system in the country to partner with the Center for Additive Manufacturing to bring curriculum on 3D printing and additive manufacturing to the K-12 level. K-12 level. So in Atlanta, we do a great job in our primary education, on our universities, but we don't do such a good job in our secondary. And so I'd really encourage us as we look in what we do and we engage with, to engage in our secondary schools, to engage in our curriculum. And if Atlanta wants to go that next stratosphere, we really got to work and put our bootstraps on to really help in secondary education. So I applaud. So Barbara, here's a good Alabama statistic. First school system in the country. All right. So I know it is SEC football time, but it's not too early for basketball season. Anybody like basketball season? So I always love doing an economic bracketology. So I put this up at the beginning of last year for NCAA basketball season and March Madness. And I said, here are the 4 economic metrics that's going to determine how this year plays out, how the economy plays out. So on the left here, I had GDP and the 10-year Treasury, which would hit 3%. And stay above 3%, the quickest and the longest for the year. So I've got a little chart up here. So we saw GDP go from 4.2% in the second quarter down to 3.5% for the third quarter. Anybody feel bad about that? Don't. Here's what happened. Typically in GDP, if you note the chart there, is normally first quarter is when it's bad because we've all gone into debt. We figured out how to use the credit card. We're off daylight savings. The weather stinks. We're not building homes, and so we're not consuming in the economy. Second quarter begins to recover. Why? Spring comes, we start to get housing going again. Third quarter then is usually our strongest. Why? Because manufacturing and retailers are trying to get everything done and in the stores, right, earlier and earlier every year. In fact, I saw Christmas stuff this year before Halloween. Couldn't believe it. Absolutely. I'm with you, Chris, on Thanksgiving. Just, can we please have that before anything else? But anyway, so third quarter should be the strongest. So why did third quarter drop? What was going on in June of this year that might have caused manufacturers and importers and exporters to maybe do more in the second quarter than third quarter? Tariffs. And what we saw, if you pay attention to earnings, I really encourage you, forget all the government economic numbers, pay attention to the earnings of the major companies in your community. And what companies like CSX Rail and Home Depot and automobile manufacturers were telling us was they were advancing activity from third quarter into second quarter to avoid the tariffs. Third quarter wasn't bad. We just shifted activity forward. And you'll see in a minute, where actually this third quarter number at 3.5% is the best third quarter that we have had in 3 years. So it wasn't bad. 10-year Treasury, about 3.5% to 4%, below 4% unemployment. I forecast that in January, what we would see was the Fed do 4 rate hikes in a hike, pause pattern. And I said those would probably come in March, June, September, and December. I got 3 of them right, Barbara, so I'm hoping I'll get all 4 right, so I'll try not to let you down. So we're going to see interest rates move up. So Chris, on those underwriting deals, everybody needs to be thinking about a 10-year Treasury in the 4 to 5% range a year from now. It's going to happen. It can work. Doesn't mean the end of real estate. right? It means that we need to make sure that NOI grows, so as the cap rate goes up, NOI offsets the rate. So we'll see what happens there. On the other side, my favorites are the NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business Optimism, and Home Builder Optimism. Who deals with home builders or land? Right? We hear the story that housing's in a recession, starts are down, sales are down. There's not enough inventory. Why aren't builders adding inventory when home prices are going up 5 to 6% annually, right? We have more millennials getting jobs, more millennials forming households. They actually are buying houses. Why aren't they adding more homes? The answer is it is almost impossible to build a home under $300,000 anywhere in this country today at a decent margin. So home builders said, why? We'll build at the move up, and the higher end price points where we're making 20 to 30% margins. They've got out of the grocery store business model. It's gone. We don't have a housing recession. We have a housing affordability crisis that's, again, recreated by the Fed. This is going to be one of the unintended consequences of going from quantitative easing to quantitative normal. And right in the consumer finance protection business, which said if a home builder comes into a bank and wants a land or lot loan, just shoot him on the street, immediately dead. Sheila, am I right? So, great CCIM candidate back there, one of the best bankers out there, Sheila Stelrina, almost done with her CCIM at the back there. And she will tell you that if you come in and try to get a lot loan or an A&D land loan, they just shoot you on the debt. It's on the Fed. It's out there. It's instructions. Take them up to 10th and Peachtree, bring them into security. They have a shooting range in there. They line you up. They just shoot you dead. Don't go take the tour, right? So home build, we don't have a recession. It's very optimistic. What I want to show you is NFIB. So I was doing a briefing to the FDIC and the Fed on September 11th. Believe it or not a good day to go into DC. Security is awful, but they scheduled it. And on that date, the National Federation of Independent Business, they do a small business optimism survey, and they've been doing this for 45 years. And on September 11th, the NFIB small business reached their highest level of optimism in the history of the survey. What better day for small business to put their hand up in the air and just leave one finger. I won't tell them which finger, Barbara, but they leave one finger up in the air to the terrorists saying, we're just fine in our capitalism model out here. So small business is incredibly happy. What's the only problem that small business has today? Finding work, right? They can't find the workforce and afford it. Before, if you look back here to right before the November elections when Trump came in, look at where the optimism was. 80s and 90s. And it was because of regulation and taxation. Look what happened just 1 month after, and here's where we broke the record. And it's still staying in that 107 range, even with the tariffs. So it's an incredibly positive story. Here's the other one. So Atlanta, you want to recruit some more businesses and companies here? Let me tell you where site selection hunting heaven is. It's at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio. They house the National Center for Middle Market Companies. They're sponsored by Site Selection Magazine and companies like Grant Thornton and Cisco. And what they do is they work with companies between $10 million and $1 billion in revenue. These are companies who have proven their concept and they're on a massive trajectory of growth. And most of them are looking that they're outgrowing where they've been. They've been in little town USA and they need to go to middle or bigger town USA. And they're trying to figure out how to export. They're trying to figure out where the logistics are. They're trying to figure out what Bob Matthews' cell phone number is right there so they can get a hold of you about Norfolk Southern and how to do a good railroad deal, right? They're trying to figure all that out. This is where to go. Twice a year they hold a conference. This is where all your tenants, this is where your small businesses are. If you want to know where to go next, these are the companies that are going to be the next, Home Depot or Scientific Atlanta that grows to, into Cisco. So if you're looking for that, and they just came out with their latest number, and 75% of middle market companies reported all positive revenue growth. Just incredible growth, and they plan on expanding their hiring. So check that out when you're done here. So here's our GDP. Here's our third quarter numbers. We've gone from 1.8 to over 3%. So it's the best third quarter, even though it went down. Now, my wife loves to play trivia. And so I always try to think about economic trivia to help her out because she always does really bad in that section. And then I do really bad in all the other sections because I don't watch, TMZ or, whatever, I don't do all the Netflix stuff or whatever. But here's your trivia. Our all-time high GDP was 16.7, an annual rate of 16.7 in 1950. Can you imagine an economy here growing at almost 17%? Now, imagine this. Imagine 8 years later, in 1958, it went to minus 10%. If you think the Great Recession was bad, imagine going from 17 to minus 10% in 8 years. That's what we did in the 1950s. So when I hear about the Great Recession, I have to remind people it was a whole lot worse back then, but those were our record numbers. So we're doing pretty well with our GDP. Here's a piece I want to point out, because in Atlanta, we tend to think that we're the epicenter of the world, that everything happens here except for traffic movement. And so what I did here is I look at GDP and I break it down at a state level. And in Georgia and Atlanta and anywhere else when I speak, I tell you, you need to know what's going on to your north, south, east, and west because someone's about ready to take you off your pedestal if you're not paying attention. So here we are, and we're running a little below 2% GDP. Do you know why Georgia runs low on GDP? We're a big import state. Imports are detractive from GDP. We import a lot of stuff for manufacturing, for goods. So if you're a big import state, you have a big port, your GDP is going to be hurt by imports. So don't worry about that. We're very productive. But if you look around, Florida's at 2.5%, Barbara's World, almost 3%. She's doing pretty well handling that. Carolinas are at 2%. Look up here at this place called Iowa, right? Almost the same GDP at a state level as Texas. So Dave Wilson dragged me up there to speak in Iowa about the economy, and I've never been to Iowa, right? I'm like, what am I going to talk about? Surely it's got to be all about agriculture. And what I found out, it had everything to do, it's going to be on my tombstone. This is one of my favorite maps. Bob knows this. He's got it by heart. He wakes up in the morning, and he says, if he hears Casey's name or hears an email, he goes, okay, I remember. This is what he's all about. So this is the Association of American Railroads. They're rail time indicators. If you don't subscribe to this, you need to. It's $110 a year. Everything that happens in this economy somehow touches the railroads. And so railroad activity is perfectly correlated to GDP. So the reason I'm so accurate, Barbara, is I just Cliff Notes cheat. This is where I cheat all the time, right? So this is a map of our 7 Class 1 railroads in the United States. We only have 7. Warren Buffett owns 1. He would like to own the other 6, but the Justice Department won't have it. Right, so the only one we don't have is Union Pacific here. Look at where all of these Class 1 railroads move from Canada into the Gulf Coast and Southeast. They move right through our backyard. And this one, Barbara, so this is with the red shoes. We're going to call this the Red Shoe Railroad. This is National Canadian Pacific that goes from Port Rupert, and it comes all the way through the Midwest down here into Port of Mobile. Right? It's the only true North American railroad that connects everything there. Now, unfortunately in Mobile, they didn't get the memo about the Panama Canal expansion. We're trying to help them, Barbara. Bless their hearts, right? We even sent pineapples down there. That's what I learned when I came to Colorado. When you have to say something and you got to get out of it, you say, just bless their hearts, right? So anyway, in Mobile, they have 2 gantry cranes. I'm not kidding you. They can't even unload 1 boat, right? It's a bulk cargo port. They move coal, pulp, and lumber. But they're the deepest port in the entire Gulf Coast. They have the most important Class 1 railroad connection, and they have 4 more. They have 5. So when you think you're pretty hot stuff over there in Savannah, and we have 2 Class 1 railroads, and we're the best in logistics, I've given it the Best Logistics Award, we better pay attention to what's going on, because Port of Mobile and Port Freeport in Texas near Houston, these are the 2 rising stars. And they're coming after your logistics business, they're coming after your e-commerce business. Walmart, so you don't think, who does stuff in Savannah or anything with Walmart? So Walmart left California, and they discovered Savannah during all the labor disruption, and they love Savannah, right? But Savannah's a river port, and it's always going to have problems and challenges there. And Walmart says they're great with logistics, but we need to have a redundant supply chain option in case a hurricane might hit and close the river or cause problems. And so they went looking around, and they went and picked the port that has the least logistics infrastructure, but the most potential. They picked Mobile. They're writing the check to build the new terminal space. And the number of containers, Mobile handles 250,000 containers today on an annual basis. Walmart alone will add 1.5 million containers within a year. They can, and you got Amazon coming in here, you've got Airbus opening their aircraft manufacturing plant. Mobile has the potential, if the state of Alabama will decide to invest in infrastructure a little bit, and we've talked a lot about that in Alabama. And by the way, if you drive to Alabama for a football game, the reason it's so easy to get back, they have the second lowest gas taxes in the country. It's 45 cents a gallon less to fill your car up in Alabama before you get back to Georgia. So before you cross over into Bremen, fill your car up, it's 45 cents a gallon cheaper. But anyway, 2 gantry cranes. They have 5 Class 1 railroads. They have the deepest port in the Gulf. And you have companies like Airbus, and you have Walmart, and all of them picking it, and they're writing the check to develop the infrastructure. We better pay attention in Georgia. The governor, we need to make sure, including the new governor, whoever that is. Have we decided yet? Hopefully we're not having Broward and Palm Beach recount our votes for us, but anyway, that could take a long time. But Governor Deal was slow to understand the value of the port. In fact, we lost the Volvo deal because the governor was slow to understand the uptake. And I know, Bob, you've got a great, Colliers does a lot over there and whatnot in the port, but that's one of our most valuable assets. In fact, 80% of the economic impact of the Port of Savannah comes directly here to Atlanta. companies that are here doing activity, Home Depot, Cisco, everybody that we've got, Georgia Pacific, home builders, all of them, they're here because of that asset. And Savannah does the best in logistics in the country. So here's what's kind of going on there. There's the railroads. Now this is a map by the International Association of Intermodal Association of North America. These colored lines are these railroads, and these dots represent intermodal facilities. So an intermodal facility is simply a place where you move a container from one mode of transportation to another. So truck to rail, ship to truck, whatever. And these black dots, if you drew a line from New York to Texas, 85% of them are south and east of there. They don't hardly exist in the western United States. So for industrial, for logistics, why Norfolk Southern maybe came and moved their headquarters here, right, Bob? We get intermodal, we get logistics. This is where our supply chain is remaking. We are completely remaking it, not because of the Panama Canal, right? But we have all of the logistics infrastructure. And so if you ask your question, why was it that we built a supply chain based in Southern California in the 1940s and 50s? What was the new infrastructure in 1956? The Highway Act was passed. It was the interstate, right? We had no EPA, so who cared about diesel emissions? And everybody was still driving on Route 66, so there was no traffic. So if a truck driver fell asleep on the new interstate system, he didn't kill anybody. He just drifted out into an agricultural field, right, Barbara? And then he eventually came back, and all was good, right? That's wholly changed today, and it's now railroad is the new infrastructure mode that we need. And we benefit from that big time here in Atlanta. We get it. We have intermodal facilities. We have air cargo. We have the port. We have all of these assets here. We just can't move trucks or anything around 285. So here's the major ports. Savannah is number 4. It just surpassed 4 million containers this year. 4 million containers. And Charleston is quickly on its heels. In fact, the new civil war is between Charleston and Savannah. Right, so I get in trouble if I say something complimentary about Savannah. They've taken a new contract out of my life in Charleston, and vice versa, right? So I have to be very careful. But figured out that's a pretty good model. They just opened the Appalachian one for Kubota Tractor. They're doing 5 more. And that moves goods around, it creates new industrial parks, it creates all kinds of economic activities. That's a big story. So, in our Amazon HQ2 piece, this was a second big piece we talked about, we coined the term Golden Triangle. And so here's a couple things to know. So the Southeast United States produces more GDP in this country than any other region in the country. Congratulations. Now I'll tell you, and I have to confess, I tell them when I go out of the region here, I tell them how that happened. So when they were drawing the economic boundary lines of the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Southeast was pretty sharp. and they got like the SEC. More people want to be in the SEC because we're so good, right? So they convinced to put more states in there. So when you have more states, you can probably have more GDP. But if you triangulate the Great Lakes, the Southwest and the Southeast region here, that's almost half of our country's GDP. Again, why do we need the Northeast, New York, D.C., California, keep fracking, keep these, if we want to secede, if things get crazy enough here, I suggest this region just secede, and we call it the Golden Triangle Nation of the world, right? This is it. We take none of the liabilities, we have all the assets, we have all the economic activity. This is a very powerful observation, and here's what's even more powerful. 80% of all economic expansion, corporate relocations, and new manufacturing has occurred in this Golden Triangle in the last 3 years. Companies get it. Amazon got it. It was about workforce availability, and it was logistics and supply chain. And if the Mississippi River would cooperate and just go straight, and you drew a line right here, 70% of our population lives east of there. Population, the new infrastructure, the Golden Triangle, right to work, the new modern ports, we have all of that. That's what's driving Georgia and Atlanta. So here's the Norfolk Southern announcement, and this was a lot tied to the logistics story. Here, I think, Bob, between the Gulch, and those deals were tied together, and believe it, when the story's written, I will tell you, you need to give a special word to Bob and the Colliers folks because they did a lot of work behind the scenes here on this. This will be almost a $900 million economic impact to Atlanta. $900 million. Who needs Amazon HQ2 when you win those type of things, right? It's absolutely incredible. The new NAFTA agreement. So the new NAFTA agreement is incredibly important. So here's the two things I want you to take away from the new NAFTA agreement. Two things. The first thing, this is a very unique trade agreement that we've never had before. In fact, the rest of the world's studying to figure out what the heck we did because it has China up at night. So what we did is we said instead of goods, the way we're going to determine whether goods get taxed or tariffed is in being based on what percentage they're made or assembled here in the U.S., they changed the model. And they said a good has to be manufactured or assembled to the degree of 75% in North America, not just the U.S. So what we've done is we've taken Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and we've created one of the most formidable manufacturing and economic power agreements that scares the hell out of Europe and China. Right? This is very transformative. Now, they had one kicker in there that's very good for us here in Georgia. They said that 75% has to also be manufactured in a high-wage zone, and they define that as $16 an hour. So what that means is no longer does Mexico have this wage advantage over us. It means that Mexico is going to have to do what we've done. They're going to have to automate, factories and manufacturing, and they're going to come to us. And they're going to come to Georgia Tech, and they're going to come to Atlanta that has a lot of that technology and that manufacturing. They're going to come over to Alabama and Mercedes and Toyota and Airbus, and they're going to go to South Carolina with BMW, and they're going to figure out that technology. And what that means is the middle class in Mexico is going to grow, and they're going to buy more of our goods. This is an incredibly transformative deal that is awesome because most of the automobile manufacturing in North America today, it all comes into the Southeast. It's Tennessee, it's Georgia, it's South Carolina, it's Alabama, right? It's all those regions, and all those parts and all those components pretty much get manufactured in Mexico. So if you own a BMW, a 3 Series, and you're unhappy with it because they leak oil, it's because they make the components in Mexico and we assemble them here and they don't get the seals exactly right. That's all going to change. It's all going to be automated. It's going to work very good now. So all this is going to, so if you have a 3 Series BMW, it's going to get better. All right. Mine just got totaled, so I'm glad to get rid of it. So, unfortunately. So we have a major paper coming out here in December. This is the hardest piece of work that I've ever done in my life. The genesis started when I was at Colliers, when we started covering the North American ports. So this is proof, Barbara, I have no artistic and design skills. So this was my idea. I figured you always got to have a catch, right? The marketing. Who's the marketing people in here? You got to have a hook. So I said, we're going to have this paper come out, and we're going to do more than just ports. We're going to look at the whole logistics supply chain. We're going to look at rail, trucking, inland ports, all intermodal, all of that type of stuff. So I said, why don't we draw something like a transformer? My little boy is 8 years old. His little transformer toy. So I said, here, this could be the globe. These could be gantry cranes. These could be railroad tracks. These could be tractor trailers. And so we gave it to these really smart kids over in the Culver House College of Design and said, could you make something like this for me? And they kind of laughed, right? This was first shot what they got. You're getting to see this first. So these are shipping containers. These are ships and railroad tracks. These are the things. And the point of the graphic is logistics infrastructure is transforming everything in our country. If you don't get logistics infrastructure, you don't get the modern economy. If I leave you with one message today, and you guys are right in the heart of that, and that benefits office, housing, retail, e-commerce, all of that. So that's the graphic there. Now, jobs. I'll give you my secret recipe on jobs. I talked about this a little earlier. So I only give one formula in each presentation. So I'd be a good professor, wouldn't I? Only one formula, they have to be on the test, and I tell you what it is. So here we wait every first Friday of each month to get the Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs numbers. So the BLS minus L equals BS. They make this stuff up. Look, I was in the Fed for 5 years. I know this for a fact. I audited it, right? So it's based on a household survey of 1,000 people with a landline that are available for a conversation and a call in the middle of the afternoon. Who in the hell are they talking to? 35 years of doing this, I've never met anybody, and probably all my audience's interaction is probably over 1 million people in 35 years, and I've never met anybody that's ever been called by the BLS. They make this stuff up. So I've relied on ADP, which processes payrolls, the second largest payroll processor. So they actually know 4 million companies and employers. And by the time the BLS gets through revising their numbers each year, they come right in on top of ADP. So ADP comes out the Wednesday before. So I've told Bob take a client, give them the ADP news on Wednesday, and say, let's go play golf Friday, because you can already do your trades and your stock transactions and have made money before this number comes out, and it's crazy. But I have a new secret sauce, the LinkedIn Workforce Report. They started producing this a little over a year ago. 146 million of us have a LinkedIn account. How many of you have a LinkedIn account? Yep, you're in good company. And what they do is they take us and they've divided us into 50,000 industry segments, from welders to lawyers, brokers, you name it. Crazy economists, there's 2 of us that are allowed in there. And what they find is there's about 3 million jobs that are occurring and changing over each month within LinkedIn. And they divide all that into this skills gap analysis that I shared with you on Amazon. And so again, here's what I showed you at the beginning. New York City would have been the worst place to go to get workforce. And DC would have been the 7th worst place. So Jeff Bezos, you failed in your RFP. It wasn't about workforce availability at all. And I think this is the big win. The second big message I would tell you for Atlanta. Atlanta has just risen to 1, 2, or 3 on every site selection city search that's going to occur for the next 2 or 3 years. because they're not going to deal with Amazon. You have workforce, you have universities, you have logistics, you have affordable housing, you have all of those things. Could you please just synchronize the lights or do something to help I-285? I love going to Tuscaloosa. I park my car. I'm 7 minutes from anywhere. You know, here's another funny story I'll tell you in Tuscaloosa. So I go over there. I don't know what the SEC is. I think it's a Securities Exchange Commission. I misspelled Coach Saban's name. I committed my third cardinal sin, Barbara. I bought a house on Orange Street. This is no joke. So my house I bought is on Orange Street. The dean is just like, what are we going to do? And so I told Bob, though, I redeemed myself. Last week we had the annual State of Tuscaloosa. And so I had to do the State of Tuscaloosa, and I had to do confession and then tell them what they're doing right. And so here's how I know I'm making progress, Barbara. On Saturday's paper in the Tuscaloosa News, I made the front page, and Coach Saban did not, on game day. So I'm making progress, right? So anyway, there's that. Commercial real estate. How are we doing in commercial real estate? So on commercial real estate, the best performing property type is, if you haven't deduced it by now, it's industrial. Green Street does a CPPI that's so much better than Moody's. They deal with actual transactions. Values are up 12% year over year. Now guess what's up the second most? It would be manufactured housing and student housing. This is the housing affordability impact. I'll compliment Atlanta on two things. So the first thing is, do you know that Atlanta now has a zoning ordinance and has actually zoned and developed 2 tiny house subdivisions in the city limits of Atlanta? It's incredible. It's very progressive. This is amazing. Here's another one for the home builders. We have 2 subdivisions underway here in Atlanta. Also, we have them in Charlotte and Nashville, and I believe one's about ready to start in Dallas, where all of the new homes are for rent, not for sale. So we're going to see a whole new type of lending that we're going to need you for, BB&T and Grandbridge. How do you finance and securitize? Grandbridge guys, you got to figure the model out. They're scratching their heads up there in Wall Street. I just met with Kroll Rating Agency. How do they securitize a for rent subdivision? Well, we've just done it with all the private equity that bought the foreclosed homes. They've been securitizing those and built a model that's incredible, right? So we're going to see single-family home subdivisions that are for rent instead of sale. It's how we're going to address housing affordability, because the millennials don't have the down payment because they're paying off over $1 trillion in student loan debt, right? They're mobile, right? And they don't have the down payment. So they have those 3 things against them. So those are things that I would look at. All right, so the big question is, are we going to go into a recession? So before the midterm elections, I would have said, if the Republicans lost both the House and Senate, okay, disclaimer slide, Barbara, forgive me, I went out and I spoke again, but this is just not political, it's just fact. If the Republicans had lost both the House and Senate, we would have turned immediately into a recession, because the economics is psychological. And what did I show you at the beginning about small business and home builders and whatnot? They're most optimistic because whether you like or hate Trump or the policies are getting results, and they've made the economy optimistic. They've broken down barriers that went too far on regulation and taxation, and those folks are optimistic. And by the Republicans, we think, holding the Senate, we don't know about all these recounts, that there's an optimism that, now it'll be do nothing. You did a lot, now we'll do nothing for 2 years and we'll figure it out. We start the campaigning for who's going to be president. So we've had, this is another trivia thing, we have had a recession in this country every 10 years since 1857. And in the first quarter of next year, we 10-year date this current recovery. So history's against us in terms of this. Here's our most recent ones and how long they've lasted. And so here's the things that I worry about. Now, the elections are past us. The elections aren't going to determine whether we have a recession. Here's what will. It's down at 10th and Peachtree, right? And fortunately, the president of that place, he rolls off the FOMC next year. We get some new people on there because he's been voting for all these rate hikes. Here's the correlation of Fed rate hikes and the 10-year Treasury. So how many of you like the economy 2004 to 6? Every hand should go up. It was great here, right? Where's Michael Bull? Where's he hiding? There you go. It was awesome, right? Roll Tide, right? He won't say that. Right. Well, during that period of time, we had 16 Fed rate hikes. And the Fed took us back to a 5% 10-year Treasury. We're having a conniption over a 3.10 Treasury. We're going to 4 or 5, folks. It's got to get back to normal, right? And so the Fed, they typically don't just move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. They typically move 10 to 15, sometimes 20 times. And when they get to 10, they start doing 50 basis point increases. And I think there's a better than a 50% chance that one of the 3 hikes next year that will probably start in January will be a 50 basis point hike. The unemployment numbers, I think that we're going to hit 3% unemployment here by the end of the year. And the wage inflation, we're seeing at about 3%. What's the bigger two inflation components we need to worry about. Housing's one, right? 40% of the CPI is housing, rents and single-family homes, and they're off the charts. The second one, look at who's developed something, construction costs. We've had 5 hurricanes hit this country in the last 12 to 14 months. And you go try to find sheetrock or lumber, look at those construction cost overruns. And so if you've started a construction project in the last 6 months or so, we're looking at 10% a year plus construction increases, both from labor and from materials. So by the time that 2-year construction loan's done, right, you've had 20% increases in the cost of that project. You better hope you were right on your pro forma on NOI increases or your value's down. And that's what scares me, is that with the Fed raising rates, cap rates eventually follow about a year later. The construction loans, when they're done, we're going to find out they're really 100% loan-to-cost deals, and the rents didn't grow as much as we thought. We're seeing it in multifamily, right, Michael? It's only 2 to 4% instead of those 8 to 12% numbers, right? Listen to Michael's show. He'll tell you what the rent numbers are doing. And so here's the tool that CCIMs know and are taught, but they don't teach appraisers anymore. And I'm an MAI. I'm a third-generation one. I will never wear the red MAI pen. I wear the green one, my father's one. They don't teach them band of investment anymore. This is what to do today and to advise your clients. It's going to happen a year from now. Look at your debt and equity structures and what they cost. And so at a 2.5 10-year treasury, we could justify cap rate deals below 6%, right? Assume nothing changes, that BB&T and Grandbridge will still do 75%, 80% loan-to-value deals. And you look at the increase in the mortgage constant from the rates going up, and we're looking at a 3.5 10-year treasury, and we're at 6 3/4 cap rate deals. Cap rates are going to go up. In 2008, cap rates moved in that year through the financial crisis 200 basis points. That's what caused the crisis in commercial real estate. It wasn't overbuilding in commercial real estate. It wasn't over leverage. It wasn't tenants moving out. It was a 200 basis point movement in cap rates. This is what we need to anticipate. And if we go back to our IRV formula, right? Old IRV, we like IRV, right? And what IRV tells us is, if cap rates go up, if you don't want value to go down, NOI's got to go up. You got to cut costs, you got to grow rents. That's where everybody should be fixated. That's probably what you're going to have more discussions on with your bankers. So here's the other thing I want you to understand. I was preaching this madly before the elections because of the misinformation out there. So you remember last December when we were told that Trump and the Tax Act were crazy, that there's no way we could even get 2.5% revenue growth? Well, we've already had over 4% revenue growth with all of it, and we haven't even got the big benefit of the Tax Act yet. The biggest benefits of the Tax Act come really next year, starting with something called opportunity zones, right? Most companies have been studying and figuring out where to deploy capital and understanding the Tax Act, and they're just getting ready to deploy it. Most of the economic benefit we've had is from deregulation. It made small business happy. Made them want to expand, right? So if you look at, this is from the Congressional Budget Office, we've had 4% revenue growth, but now let's look at our expense side. The line item with the single most growth is net interest on our public debt. It's up almost 20%. We've had 4 rate hikes in that time frame, and we've added another $1 trillion in debt. This is what ruins the party. This is what causes a 1978 to 1981 Paul Volcker era all over again. And when you have massive uncontrolled debt, how do you get rid of it? You deflate it. You create massive inflation to deflate the debt. This is what we in real estate all need to be thinking about. That's why it's important that at the state level, you keep your fiscal house in order. Because if you can't rely on fiscal programs from the federal government, you need to make sure you can do it at your state level, because your companies will come here and be there. All right, so we have a paper coming out. In about a week, we had a teaser on it this week, didn't we, Barbara? On commercial real estate finance disruption. And by the way, I'm going to stop on this. The reason we're getting this content stuff out now, we're trying to do one every quarter, is because under the leadership of Dave Wilson and Barbara Crane, they came and they said, we hear from the CCIM that you want content. And so this whole program, and why I'm here and doing this stuff and we're getting these papers out, is because they heard you, just like they heard you on how to get a site to do business and deal with that issue. So thank you, Barbara. But this is a paper we have coming out real shortly here on, are we going to have another commercial real estate finance disruption? So since we've had a recession every 10 years, the elections are done, and here's what concerns me. So we went back in this paper and we looked at every commercial real estate finance disruption back to 1955. And the things that typically cause them are inflation, trade wars, tax acts, regulation changes, right? Any one of those have caused a major disruption. We have all of those front and center right now. So history's against our side, and everything that's ever caused a disruption, all of them combined are front and center right now. And here's the one that scares me the most. Commercial real estate debt in our banks is worse than it was before 2008. Dodd-Frank didn't do a doggone thing. And I tell them this, I go up, say I get to go back, I still brief the Fed 4 times a year, and the reason they do that is that they know I don't have to go to public affairs, and they don't have to deal with that, and they can't fire me, I've already been gone, right? So this is a debt chart that Reese does from the New York Fed data, and we've grown from $255 billion in commercial real estate in the 1950s to $4.1 trillion. It's the most we've ever had, and the most in dollar amount and percentages in our banks, 55%. And here's a chart that shows the growth in that. This is bank growth in commercial real estate since the financial crisis. Here's life companies, securitization. They've barely grown at all. And so if we have a disruption, where's it going to back up? Chris, at Thanksgiving, give thanks for a good year. The regulators are coming to harass you more next year. And here's what I think causes it. There's always that black swan event out there. It's lease accounting. Blame the accountants, Chris. This is all. Who's accountants in here? Anybody know an accountant? Anybody like an accountant? April 15th is a good time to like an accountant, right? So we've been dealing with this for a decade, a long, long time. And if you'd had Barbara and them in charge, we probably could have got this thing straightened out and then not got this far down the road. But anyway, at the end of next year, all public companies have to report their leases as liabilities. And that hasn't been there. They've been footnotes up until this point in time. So you have this massive coming of liabilities on the company's balance sheets that, by the way, could change their credit rating. We could have AA companies become maybe BBB, or single A become non-investment grade, and that have a lot of consequences. And here's what we have to hope happens. Okay? This is your call to action. So what we have to hope happens is they have a formula to determine the offsetting asset for that liability, and it's called right of use. Who's heard of the right of use? Barbara has. So you'd have thought they would have come to the real estate industry to ask how to do it, right? We know how to do it. We know how to calculate the present value of the liability of a lease. You'd think we'd know how to tell them how to calculate the value, a leasehold interest. Essentially, it's a leasehold interest or lease fee interest. They didn't. And the accountant said, we're smarter, and we're going to develop a formula, and we'll tell you what it is sometime mid-next year. We have no idea. They could massively overstate it, massively understate it, and guess what? They said, we'll tell you one thing. It's not going to be correlated at all to market rent or market value. Oh my God, this is going to be a cluster. And my fear is what it does is it disrupts the permanent debt market. It causes things to back up. Who does triple net lease deals? It's in the toilet next year. Absolutely in the toilet, because companies can no longer afford to do 15, 20, 25-year leases. And they're going to look at probably 5-year duration deals, or you wonder why CBRE is doing the co-working deal, or WeWork has grown so much. This is a solution. Companies don't have a lease anymore. They have a co-working relationship. It's less than a year, right? They don't have a liability. They don't have the furniture and fixture and equipment. They don't have an operating lease. This is going to grow co-working office, co-working warehouse. In fact, I heard co-hoteling today. I heard the story on doing how that works. I got to retire in 10 years. I can't process this anymore, right? So this is the big wild card to look at. This is what puts us in a real estate recession a year from now in 2020. So pay attention to it. Get up to date. This is detailed information and the difference between a finance and an operating lease, and it's the operating leases that we got to worry about. Here's the other thing. Everybody thinks this applies just to maybe retailers or whatnot. This is every public filing company, including REITs. So on the one I'm with, they had no clue. And we're in a scramble to try to figure all this stuff out. So all of those Amazon long-term leases on there. All right, the other thing we did is we published in August, we published this thing on adaptive reuse, because it was kind of like pornography. Nobody knew what it was until they saw it, right? Bless me, Barbara. I went out and I said the word again, right? Tell Grace I did 3 bless me's, right? I'm all there. So we did this paper on adaptive reuse. Nobody had quantified it. Nobody had defined it. Nobody had given any idea of how to make it work. Why is this important? Opportunity zones. Most of the physical assets that you're going to find to do adaptive reuse are going to be in opportunity zones, and they're right on the fringe. Look at your zones here in Atlanta. And so we went in and we defined kind of what's driving. I won't spend too much time on there. And we put some examples. Who's familiar with Gwinnett Place Mall? I know you are, Sheila. So I date myself in Atlanta by infrastructure and real estate projects. So I'm pre-285 and I'm pre-Gwinnett Place Mall. And there's a big consternation going on up in Gwinnett County and the commissioners what to do with Gwinnett Place Mall. And the Gwinnett County commissioners think that they can fill it back up with retailers. Oh my God, right? We need to just take them all back out, just shoot them all dead, start all over again, right? Maybe Gwinnett will finally get MARTA and they'll get a new county commission that realizes what's happening. So here's what may be the future of a lot of suburban malls. This is in Barbara's World in Texas, in Mesquite, Texas. The company that I'm on the board of directors, Monmouth, we took this mall, 900,000 square feet, and we converted it into a fulfillment center for FedEx. Absolutely incredible story. Its value is greater on the tax rolls than when it was on as a mall. Truck traffic is 20% less than when malls and department stores operated there. And we're seeing all kinds of activity come around it. This is one in Memphis. This is the sister project, DuPont City Market. And the reason I wanted to include this, we missed one opportunity. And I was at that other bank that, says they're on up, but I think sometimes they're on up on something, but not what they should be. But anyway, I spent 3 years doing brain damage on how to do this deal after we did Ponce City Market. But this is an old Sears distribution center in Memphis. It's one of the most blighted areas. And what we did is we worked with Service Master, which was thinking of leaving Memphis. And we worked to help put all their back operation headquarters stuff in here. We worked with St. Jude's Hospital to put multifamily in there for all the families who have kids undergoing treatment. They master leased everything. We got a hotel, we got meeting space, and we still had about 20% of this massive facility left over. And we looked around the neighborhood and we said, you know what? All the schools are dilapidated. There hadn't been a new school built here in 60 or 70 years. So we worked with the city, and our final solution was we put a brand new charter high school in the middle of this project. So now kids that have never seen capitalism, that never had an opportunity to interact with how business works, are now going to school every day and here and interacting with business. Imagine if we had done that in Ponce City Market, given our school problems here in the city of Atlanta. So what I tell you is when you're looking at big projects and adaptive reuse, think about secondary education and a way that you can fix it. Here's another one, the warehouse story. All right, these are tent warehouses. You think I'm crazy. How many of you been to the Denver International Airport? The tarp, the covering that's on there, this is the same stuff. Little company called Clearspan Fabric in Iowa makes this stuff. Right? And they're working with a little company called Amazon in a city known as Memphis, and they're building these right now. They can't wait 1.5 to 2 years to build these traditional warehouses, and they can't wait on the costs. So they're building these at $36 a square foot. They're heavily engineered steel with this fabric. And what's missing in this warehouse? It might just make a warehouse or supply chain guy just have the most wonderful Thanksgiving ever, Chris. There's no columns. 35-foot clear, no columns, up in 6 months at $36 a square foot. This is going to disrupt the industrial market like mad. I'm working with several ports where they're looking at this as solutions for terminal space. Amazon loves it because the other thing they can do is, let's say their supply chain changes, or Walmart, they disassemble it. And all they need to do is put a new ductile concrete floor in. And they can have that up in months. So this is an adaptive type of reuse on warehousing. Now, I will tell you, this is a true picture in Alabama. I'm involved in the litigation of this thing right now. This is what affordable housing is going to look like in New York and Northern Virginia in about 12 months, right? You're going to have people buying all of those old RVs and trailers we couldn't get rid of, Barbara, in Alabama. They're all going to Northern Virginia. This is an actual project here. This guy has a KOA campground here for showers and restrooms. There's no plumbing in these things, but there is electricity. He rents these things for $400 a month. I'm doing the condemnation case against the Department of Transportation on this. They think this is only worth land value. And I did an appraisal and an analysis on it, and I said my conclusion that made the judge's hair just about fall out was that this is the highest grossing per square foot apartment complex in the entire Southeast United States. It absolutely is. Now, I'm sure you couldn't do this at BB&T in Grandbridge. It doesn't meet a lot of criteria or inspection probably, but adaptive reuse can go too far, but this is how far our affordable housing project is. I'm not going to go through these slides. At the CCIM Global Conference, we did a thing on blockchain. Barbara and them came to me and said, Casey, we have one more question for you in addition to interviewing Walter Robb. Could you do a session on blockchain? I said, sure. She said, one caveat. You have 15 minutes. So I will tell you, it's on film. I did it in 14 and a half minutes. There actually is a book called Blockchain for Dummies. It was written by IBM as part of their sales pitch to get the contract with Air Shipping on doing their coding for blockchain. So this is that. Blockchain is very real. CCIM is leading the way. The Ward Center has I think we had it here at the end. It's in the deck. If you go to the CCIM website, you can go to the Word Center. There's a webinar that we have that will help you, and Barbara and CCIM are very involved with that. I will tell you, if you think this is crazy, and blockchain coming to commercial real estate. It's already happening today. This is the first all blockchain real estate, commercial real estate transaction that occurred earlier this year up in Vermont on a condo deal. And what blockchain essentially does is this. Today, we have all these intermediaries. We have banks, title companies, escrow agents, brokers that help a transaction occur because we all have our own piece of data in our ledger that we have to verify. And what blockchain does is as we get rid of all that, we'll put it all in one central place. Here's where I think blows blockchain up. Do y'all believe blockchain or any database system is unhackable? They claim it is. And I think we're going to see a backlash in this country that says we're done with centralizing all of our data where one person can get it at one point and do unlimited damage. And I think the undoing is we just had it happen. It's not been widely covered, but there's a database that the FBI and the federal government use that tracks everything on us to incredible detail. In fact, how many of you use your phone in your car, interface with your car? Well, when you do that, it links to the black box in your car. And all that data is uploaded to the FBI and the federal government. And it's a database system called TLO. It's nicknamed for the last one. They thought it was the most unhackable database in the world. And they just discovered that a rapper group hacked into it and was figuring out how to do all kinds of nefarious things because of sending wrong information to the FBI and the government officials, and they were doing all kinds of crime. So this is what I worry about. We're going to do all of this around blockchain. They have a central ledger where all of our information is. And my message is I hope we stop and think about how to build protections, because I think we're about ready to go into a period of time where we repel against all this centralization of information, where we know everything about everything that's going out there. So with that, a last thing for Christmas. If you have kids or family members that are bugging you for a new iPhone, I have the perfect answer to say, the backup why you should say no. Because a year from now, we're going to need a blockchain phone. So I have the Droid version, which is the most hackable smartphone, but for in your 50s, it's very easy to use. I still haven't gone to the iPhone world. This is the most hackable. So tell them to wait. Next year, you're going to get them a blockchain phone that'll be more secure for them. So you won't have to buy the iPhone. So with that, I'll conclude. Everything is closer than it appears, including the next real estate recession, the next Amazon opportunity. I think Atlanta is uniquely poised. It probably may have been one of the best blessings in disguise to not win it. And I think that Northern Virginia and New York are going to be that snake in the outback in Australia that tried to swallow and eat a kangaroo, and they can find it very hard to digest. I'm done. So we got like 4 minutes, I guess, for questions? Yes, sir.
All right, so I am an accountant, but I'm more familiar with the opportunities. But the question is, so it seems that right now, and tying into your logistics, Republicans and Democrats are pretty much favoring or speaking towards infrastructure. So what do you think with respect to the prospects, scopes, and sticking points on something happened by the government for infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, it seems like we can get harmony between both Republicans and Democrats around infrastructure. So what are the prospects? So here's the first thing I would say. We need to redefine infrastructure. It's not roads and bridges. It's utilities, it's education, it's ports, it's logistics infrastructure. This paper that I'll release in December is designed, hopefully with 5 different state legislatures, to give them cover to go to their legislatures in 2019, including Alabama, and say, if you want your economy to grow, you need to invest. Whether it's a gas tax, whether it's a sales tax or something else, you can't be second lowest in the world and expect to have an economy that grows. And so I think the first challenge is they won't come to agreement as to what legitimate infrastructure is. Remember during the Obama administration, remember all those shovel-ready projects? What in the world was shovel-ready? So Sheila will attest to this. I live out in Gwinnett in the Lilburn Parkview area, and one of the shovel-ready projects was adding sidewalks to an area that didn't need sidewalks and already had them on the other side of the street. That was shovel-ready. So that's my big fear, is we don't get what infrastructure is, and we need to change the dialogue from just infrastructure to logistics infrastructure. And that's everything from education, utilities, ports, intermodal. It's all of those pieces. And I don't think they have a clue. And so I think it's really going to come down to the state levels. Let me give you the best example. South Carolina 12 years ago is where Alabama was with ports and manufacturing. BMW was ready to leave. They hadn't won Boeing, they didn't have Volvo, they didn't have Samsung, they didn't have Dollar Tree, Rite Aid, they didn't have any of that. And the little port director by the name of Jim Newsom, who's over there today, said, I have this idea about an inland port. And really what BMW wanted to do was figure out how to put cars in containers. So take all the fluids out of them and create some jobs wherever they go where they're reassembled, but you don't give away the technology in the factory. And so he worked with BMW to create that first one in Greer, South Carolina. And he had to go to the legislature to get funding because they didn't have any funding. And the legislature said, well, doesn't the government fund that through this thing called the HMT, the Harbor Maintenance Tax? And what we found, it's like the Social Security Trust Fund. It's been depleted. It's been raided. Congress takes half of the funds out of there and they use them for anything and everything else. So that's the money that's supposed to be there to help with dredging in our inland waterways, and Congress, raids it all the time and nobody knows about it. So he said to South Carolina, if we really want to make a difference here, and we're a state port authority and we want to create economic development, I need a $300 million check from you guys. I need to develop rail, inland ports, I need to become a deeper port, I need gantry cranes, I need all of this stuff. And here's why it's not going to happen. And if you give it to me, I'll phase it, I'll create economic development like you've never seen. So they said, okay, well, Governor Haley, she said, okay, I trust you. So I was involved in helping him do that. 12 years later, Airbus, right? Volvo doubled. BMW. Volvo is coming. Do you know, here's another trivia question. Do you know what the car manufacturer is in the United States that makes more cars here for export is? It's BMW of South Carolina. They make and export more cars than GM or Ford combined in the United States. So when you think about all this craziness, and same with Mercedes and what they're doing over in Alabama. And so he did that, and he got the cranes in a $300 million capital campaign that will conclude here in about 2 years. And they will go toe-to-toe with LA Long Beach. They will go from 3 million containers to probably 6 million containers in the next 3 to 5 years. And what's happening is these shipping alliances are picking the ports that they're going to call ports of preference. And the shipping alliances, bigger ships mean fewer ports of calls. So they're going to call on fewer and fewer ports. And so they're going to look at the deep water ones, the ones that have the infrastructure, and they're looking at that logistics infrastructure. And so I think if we can do anything it's to educate the Georgia legislature and the governor about logistics infrastructure. And for our congressional and Senate people to help them understand that so they can take and influence that. We have some really good people in the Trump administration that get this stuff. I meet probably every 6 months maybe with Wilbur Ross, know him from my Fed days, helped him buy a bank or two that were failed. Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross and some of the people that I hope we don't lose in the cabinet, they get this stuff. They were the ones behind the USMCA transformative agreement. But in answer to your question, I don't think they understand it. They don't know how to define it. They still think it's like pornography. They'll identify infrastructure when they see it. I have a fear that if they pass a big bill, it'll become like the shovel-ready projects, and we really need more of a targeted level. Put it in the hands of the states. It's just like healthcare and everything else. Put incentives. That's what the opportunity zones are. They've said, each state, an equal opportunity, 25% of your low-income areas, you all identify them, you pick them, you advocate them, and we'll cut all the red tape and we'll give that for you. Let's just emulate the opportunity zones in terms of infrastructure zones. So anything we can do, but I think we've got to educate our elected leaders. Look at just Atlanta. I'll give you a case in point of that. Look at Bob left. So look at what happened with Norfolk Southern in the Gulch. When we elect a new city council and a new mayor that maybe don't have the foundation on things like tax allocation districts in our world, they almost completely blow it. And we almost ended up with the Gulf sitting there forever. And maybe it could be our new water source because Alabama won't let them have any water over here. So that's if you want to know the answer to why Alabama won't give you guys your water that you need, is because if you give us half of all the economic development, we'd give you half the water. We'd give them some of Lake Logan Martin, wouldn't we? Maybe a little bit. All right, good question though. You have a question? No? All right, Michael Boyle, you got to have a question. That's what you do.
What do you think the impact on Symington and Natalie's property values? What might happen there related to FASB? Some of these companies are short leases, they want to own more than lease. Could it impact values in a good way if you own them?
Yeah, so good question. His question was, what happens, the impact on triple net lease properties with the lease accounting change? So if you've got something already, so I just did this. I had fun in a tax appeal case with a tax assessor, and it was involved one of these big stores like a Walmart or Home Depot or whatever. And so I said, you guys are going to have a big problem in a year or two when you have two identical big boxes or net lease deals, and one has a 15 or 20-year lease or maybe 13 years left on it, and here's a new one that has a 5-year lease. They look the same. they have the same tenant, they have the same credit, but they're going to be valued very differently. Because do you think the permanent debt market is going to be satisfied with a 5-year duration lease versus one over here? And I think if you have one, you could see cap rate suppression into the 4 or 3% range. They could drop by 200 basis points. And for the new stuff, you can't get them financed. You're going to have to talk to Chris about innovating some new finance product, because you think about what different capital sources do is they're matching their assets to the liability. So if you're a bank, your liability are CDs and short-term deposits. So that's why banks don't go beyond 3 to 5 year instruments, because they got to match the demand of that. So why do life companies and securitizations go longer? Because a life company sold an insurance product, an annuity, and they want that money working for 10 or longer years. So when that annuity or that life company comes due, they sell the asset, they built up a big cash flow, and they don't want to deal with any of that stuff. They don't want to reprocess it, they don't want to retrade it, they don't want any of that disruption because they've already sold the contract at a time where the capital markets were different, and now they may be at a totally different numeric thing. And so I think what happens is the life companies, and I've already been talking to the rating agencies and 2 or 3 large life companies, and they've already said, we'll probably just pull out of the market. That we need to match, we need to find other assets that have a 10, 15, or 20-year duration, and we'll find lots of other financial products, and we'll step away from real estate for a year or two. It'll get fixed. It'll be a massive disruption for a year or two. And the analogy I use is go back to August 1998, right? So when securitization blew up the first time. And everybody thought they knew about hedging, and the hedging was supposed to be shorting treasuries, and they found out that half of them were using the Russian currency. And so when Russia defaulted on the ruble, we had this massive disruption in securitization that shut the darn market down. And I was at a Legacy South Trust bank where it could have brought the bank down on basically what happened. It's these disconnects, and it got fixed. We figured out how to deal with it over time. But I think if you have one, it could go up a lot in value. And new stuff, you may not even be able to place it for a year or two. And so I think that could cause retail franchise expansion to slow down. That could have an economic impact. McDonald's is trying to get out of corporate-owned stores and franchise and do more net lease stuff. Chick-fil-A likes to own their stuff. So companies like Chick-fil-A, maybe no disruption. McDonald's, massive disruption. So it won't even be equal in the net lease market. You need to be starting to look at those companies that you deal with and look at what percentage are corporate-owned versus leased, because that could be very much disruptive. Great question. Do you want to know what the Georgia-Alabama score is going to be in the SEC championship? It's going to be high scoring. Barbara, you got a question?
You asked me yesterday if we were going to bet on it.
Oh yeah, we have a wager, don't we, Barbara?
Yeah.
So shall we just tell them what our wager was? So here's our wager. If Georgia wins, Barbara and I will treat the CCIM chapter to unlimited varsity chili dogs and frosted oranges. If Alabama wins, all of you guys have to buy Allbird red shoes and wear them at your CCM chapter events for the next year while Barbara's in charge. Is that a wager? So it's a wool type tennis shoe or some sort of red attire. I'll help you out if you can't find red shoes. I will tell you that my outfit next year, if you invite me back, is going to be very different, Barbara. So as I travel around, each of the CCM chapters have been telling me that I need to wear their SEC schools colors. So when I was in Knoxville right before the Alabama, I wonder who was scheduling my thing, because I got scheduled to go speak to the East Tennessee chapter right before the Alabama-Tennessee game. So they said, okay, you got to take your shoes off, and they gave me orange Tennessee checkered socks to wear. So a year from now, I will have a piece of attire from every SEC school, and I'll look like something from a Shriners Parade. That's when Barbara said, we got to get a new economist. We got a clown instead, right? Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Barbara.
Casey, thank you so much for a wonderful, informative, and entertaining presentation. I like those shoes. I want to go find some of those. And thank you again to all of our sponsors. We wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and wonderful holiday season. We look forward to seeing you at our 2019 annual meeting to be held on January 23rd at the Ansley Golf Club. And with that, we adjourn. Thanks, everybody.